There always seems to be a debate about whether or not to use a filter over your lenses, and what benefits or drawbacks they might have. Does the protection they offer outweigh any image quality drawbacks they might have? To answer that question, I set up this test. I placed a Macbeth chart and some lens targets in my studio to be this small in the image. Then I shot an image with no filter on the lens and examined it for resolution. Next, I placed a cheap but clean filter on the lens and repeated the test. I can't see any difference between this and the unfiltered image. But with a dirty filter I could. So I'm confident that a glass filter over your lens will have no visible detrimental effects on sharpness, unless it's dirty. And I'd rather clean a filter very often than my lens. I use a protective filter and a lens hood on all my lenses. However, there are times when a filter can increase flare. The window to the right is shining directly into the lens. This image shows the loss of contrast that a filter can cause. So when I'm faced with extreme backlighting, I'll remove the filter. Without the filter, the image is acceptably contrasty, without too much effect from that strong backlight. Later in the program, I'll show some other steps that I take to reduce flare. Sometimes we need to use a neutral density filter to either lengthen the shutter speed or allow me to open up for a shallower depth of field than I otherwise could. This variable filter from Tiffin gives me anywhere from 2 to 8 steps of darkening. In this image I needed the longer shutter speed so I could blur the water. For this shot I wanted a powerful flash to balance with the sunlight, but that can result in too much depth of field because the fastest shutter speed that I can use is a 2/50th of a second with a regular flash unit. But with a neutral density filter I can open up a lot. Here I only needed 3 stops more. If you're wondering about focusing through one, remember that this is in bright sunlight, so there's no problem focusing. Another filter that's very helpful is a polarizer. The first and most obvious use of a polarizer is to darken a light sky like this one. And the polarizer did its job. Because I wanted to avoid shadows on her face, I had her tip her head up and close her eyes in the bright sunlight. Now, normally we want soft light for people, but during this exposure, a cloud passed over and gave us soft light. But that reduced the amount of light on her, and the camera compensated, thereby lightening the sky, and that's not good. In this situation, we want sunlight, so I had to wait for the cloud to go away. This shot was done with my 300mm lens, and I didn't have a polarizer for that lens. So without it, the water is blown out and has no color. Here I switched to my 70-200 lens and used the 77mm polarizer. A polarizer is most effective when the sky is 90 degrees from the sun. If you're shooting toward the sun or with the sun at your back, a polarizer won't do much of anything to the sky. When you use a polarizer with a very wide-angle lens, you'll run into this problem, that the polarization effect will vary across the sky. So you'll need to even that out. Probably the best way to do that is in your raw conversion software to reduce any banding that might occur in the sky. A polarizer works great with busy reflections on a windshield. The difficulty here is that they're also on the side windows, and that's a different polarized angle. So we'll start with dialing out the front windshield reflections with the polarizer. Next, we'll spin the polarizer about 90 degrees to dial out the side reflections. And finally, we combine the two with Photoshop layers in the darken mode. Or you could just layer them and mask out the reflections. I use a polarizer when I want to reduce glare to help with the saturation on vehicles. I think this is much better.
There are times when a polarizer isn't needed and could actually make the sky too deep of a blue, making it look very unnatural.
Here's a case where a polarizer wasn't needed because it wasn't wanted. I want those reflections in the window. It's part of the image's character. My camera angle was 90 degrees to the low, warm sun. I used a polarizer, but the left of the image went too dark. Because it's a wide angle, the polarization wasn't uniform across the sky because of the wide field of view the lens covers relative to the sun. I think this amount of blue is just fine without the polarizer.
One of those times is when you're shooting with your subject in direct sunlight and your camera is facing 90 degrees from the sun. The sky will look its maximum blue. Another time is with a low, warm sun to your back. The subject will be very warm. In the raw conversion software, you'll probably remove some of that warmth by making the image more blue. And this adds blue to the sky. Okay, for those of you who don't like toys, skip through to the next section. You'll need a van to haul the lighting equipment. Arrange it so that you can get stuff out without having to take other stuff out first.
For about 99 cents, you can buy a water bottle fan that can either make people sweat or cool them off.
For guys, I like to use their props as much as possible. With weights and other sports, perspiration is good. Here he is with a dry face. And with water from that spray bottle, so he looks like he's in the middle of a workout. I'll mention this tool again later in the section on weather, but a leaf blower does a nice job of blowing girls' hair back for a more glamorous look. If the girl has a hairstyle that'll work for this, blowing her hair back adds some dynamics to the image.
And a few more fan examples.
Of course, you want to use a battery-operated blower with a variable control, not a gas-powered blower.
If you need a fog machine in your studio, an electric fog machine is the way to go. This was done in the 1980s, but fog is always fun to play with, and seniors get a kick out of it. I took the fog machine outdoors at night and I used an extension cord. This too was done in the 1980s, and what I learned was that backlit fog requires very little light. Sometimes I'll want fog on location, so this portable bug sprayer filled with fog juice produces a lot of fog. Just be sure to use a new fog machine, one that never had any bug spray in it. This is okay, but this is better. I'd advise also having a leaf blower handy to clean up the smoke in front of your subject's face. There's a hole in the roof of this old shed where I'm going to place a little speedlight flash. This and some smoke will make a cool light beam. The smoke from a fogger isn't the same as real fog, but it's close enough. Her boyfriend in the background gave me a low burst that I let dissipate before I pressed the shutter release. But generally outside you need a lot of fog because the wind can dissipate it very quickly. Adding colored flash to the fog adds extra dimension of interest. You do that by gelling the flash units, which in this case were speedlights. If there's no wind or you want fog in the background more as mood than a strong fog, then an aerosol spray can can do the job. This requires 2 people, so I had his mom operate the spray can. I like this image as is, and this was done with a 300mm f2.8 lens. But I'm sure there'll be plenty of clients who prefer the added fog. Again, when you backlight smoke, it really shows up. Smoke grenades not only spew a lot of smoke, but they also come in various colors, which gives a different look than hitting colorless smoke with colored light. It's pretty uncontrollable, so once you start it, you just have to let it go. And on this one I had to combine several exposures to get this final result. And finally, if you don't want to deal with real smoke, you could fake it by adding the smoke in Photoshop. I did this by grabbing some smoke images off the internet, but you can easily make your own in the studio or outside at night. But doing this in the computer robs the senior of the experience, so I wouldn't recommend it unless it's an afterthought.